One of the most common heroes in American popular culture is the rebel. This archetypal figure is particularly obvious in rock and roll of the 1950s, as displayed in The Juvenile Delinquent. Rebellion is also present to some extent in the cowboy, especially the outlaw cowboy of Hollywood films and country music. Even the protest music of the 1960s, akin to the spirit of Woody Guthrie, is a kind of rebellion against the status quo and the commercialization of popular music. In American popular music, the rebel often has a resurgence after music has become watered down in tone by commercialism and mainstream success. The rebel is the one who seeks to shake things up, promoting or reflecting social change. It makes sense that America would be a country that celebrates rebellion, especially considering this country's history as the young upstart nation successfully revolting against England, the paternalistic empire of the Old World. The rebel has no reverence and respect for the old way of doing things. He may not know exactly where he's going, but it has to be better than where he's been. In the 1950s, the juvenile delinquent depicted by James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause challenged the materialism and lack of communication in the typical American suburban home. James Dean's character is not really sure what he wants to change, but his frustration and dissatisfaction comes out as a range of antisocial behavior. I am reminding you of this movie because I think it captures the rebellious nature of punk music, which begins to take shape as a musical form in the late 1960s. If protest music of the 1960s was a political rebellion, rebellion with a cause, punk music no longer had patience with the hippie dream. Like the early rock and roll of the 1950s, punk was a rebellion with no cause, a rebellion for the sake of rebellion. Throughout this unit, we will see that the punk attitude is what permeates popular music throughout the 1970s, having a huge impact on underground music of the 1980s, 1990s, and today. It's important to keep in mind that many of the artists we'll be focusing on were not very popular in their own time, but had the biggest influence on artists to come later. In fact, it's the relative unpopularity of some of these punk artists that exhibited their punk credentials, that made them authoritative rebels against a commercialized music system. You may be surprised to see hip-hop and even disco as part of this unit on rebellion, but I hope by the end you will see how these musical forms were perhaps the most revolutionary of all. The transition from psychedelic rock to punk music happened in the Midwest of the United States, in Detroit. Here is a picture of the MC5, short for Motor City 5. You may be able to detect a bit of the punk aesthetic already from this picture, which reflects the militant antagonism and spare quality of the music. Punk music tended to be performed by working-class kids in urban contexts. A minimalist form of music, the songs are often only 2 or 3 chords and lack the compositional sophistication or virtuosic guitar solos of progressive rock. In fact, one could see the rise of punk music as a rebellion against the increasingly expensive recordings of progressive rock bands. Punk is spare, brute force, in-your-face attitude. In this video clip, MC5 guitarist Wayne Kramer explains how the band got together. Kramer's account captures the nature of the band as antagonizers, young kids with pent-up frustrations, stuck in an auto manufacturing city, their fathers working factory jobs the kids didn't want. Perhaps Kramer's story even explains why the band gravitated toward the militant message of the Black Power movement and hated the middle-class fantasy world of the hippies. Let's listen to one of the best-known MC5 songs, Kick Out the Jams. Remember, this is not considered punk music yet, but many of the punk qualities are already present in 1969. In many ways, this song harkens back to the R&B and greaser rock and roll of the 1950s. For example, notice the sexual innuendo throughout the lyrics. The song expresses the way rock music helps break through whatever keeps you stuck. But there's also a sexual connotation to the lyrics. The word jams may also refer to male ejaculation, a reference that might also be familiar to fans of the 1990s grunge band Pearl Jam. An even more iconic rock star of the Protopunk era is Iggy Pop. Iggy Pop and the Stooges took the antagonistic attitude of the Doors lead singer Jim Morrison to the next level. Iggy Pop's onstage antics communicated that he didn't care how the audience viewed him. He was going to do his thing, be his own work of art. In one of the most famous moments in rock history, Iggy Pop descended into the crowd at a Cleveland rock show, spontaneously grabbed a jar of peanut butter from a person in the audience, and rubbed it all over himself. Even though proto-punk and punk music were not popular with mainstream audiences of the 1970s, the influence of the music can be understood in terms of the time in which it was born. In 1969, the hippie dream of a new social consciousness seemed to have failed. John F. Kennedy was assassinated, Martin Luther King Jr. was shot and killed, and at the 1968 Democratic Convention in Chicago, city police broke up a large, peaceful protest with batons, shields, tear gas, guns, and tanks. The last band to play at the Chicago rally before the riot broke out happened to be the MC5. One of the best documents of that tumultuous time is Iggy Pop's Search and Destroy. The title refers to the American military strategy in Vietnam, in which soldiers would search out the enemy, descend on them with military helicopters, and wipe them out. The song could suggest that the noisy violence and antagonism of punk music is the embodiment of the violence of war, not just the war in Vietnam, but the cultural war going on in the streets of America.